So I guess like this film you had last time you were here, you were cutting the first cut
I don't remember. Yeah, was I?
in your hotel
we
room.
shot it, right? Okay.
Remember that weekend in New York where you didn't
oh,
go outside?
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we just finished shooting, and Britt was quite mad at me because we came to New York, and I never left the Airbnb because I was editing the whole time. So.
So congratulations on it being done, and now you're shooting
you.
in another movie all of a sudden. So we'll start with I think we'll start the Q&A with the question that we usually end a Q&A with. Well, what are you guys working on? Because you could already have 5 films done, and we'll, you know.
I mean, the production company that made the movie is my company as well, and it's basically a group of friends that are consistently just making stuff. We just kind of got sick of waiting for, people to approve our financial ability to go to camera. So the movie that we just wrapped yesterday, actually, in Calgary, Alberta, is a movie called Z. It's about a kid an 8-year-old boy who develops an imaginary friend that may or may not be real. It's more of a pure horror film, but it's a movie that I co-wrote and am a producer on, and a friend, Brandon Christensen, directed, who had a movie play here last year as well,
Yeah,
Stillborn. Yeah.
Brittany?
Oh, yes. So I've been in Toronto the last couple months working on a new show called The Boys. It's for Amazon, and it's got the same team behind it that does that show Preacher on AMC. So it's a really dark, funny, tragic look at superheroes and celebrity culture, and it's pretty fun. Yeah.
So bringing it back to what keeps you alive, I think the first thing I want to talk about is, if I'm not mistaken, the original conception was a man and his wife go to a cabin.
Yeah.
How did that switch, and when did that change take place?
I wrote What Keeps You Alive for an actor who I've worked with a couple times in the past. Initially, I wrote the character of Jack, initially, for an actor, and what happened? It was like, we'd basically set a date, and we were gonna go and make this movie. We were gonna travel to the middle of nowhere and do it. And I got a Skype call pretty much right before moving out there to start pre-production and kind of finding the locations and so on, that he'd just gotten offered a substantial role on a TV series that was like a season-long arc, and that's good money, way better than what I could ever pay him. So, so he bowed out, but it was such a blessing in disguise. I'm sure he would have done a great job, but it would have been a very different movie. But when I was initially writing, even like the very first draft and toying with the idea, I'd had the kernel of like, this would be more interesting as a same-sex couple, but I was so hell-bent on writing this like psychopath role for an actor who I just thought was the next, Norman Bates type performance he could give. So it changed dramatically, and it wasn't like the writing changed dramatically. The writing actually, from that character's perspective, stayed relatively similar, but the struggle was to find a female actor who could pull that off.
But it was pretty cool to watch Colin in that process, because we got the news a month before going to camera, and the guys had all moved up to Muskoka, which is a kind of cottage country north of Toronto where we shot the film, and pre-production was well underway. So, there was definitely some panic around it, but you just went with the flow, and some of the freshest ideas in the script came in the month leading up to filming. It was a really solid script before then, but you just kind of let your inspiration and let all these changing things, like you were talking to one actress about playing Jackie and learned a lot from her and her relationships, and you infused some of that into the script, and then she didn't end up ultimately working on the film, though her song is essentially the title song in the film, Bloodlet, that you hear a couple times. But her essence, and then again you adapted it once Hannah became involved, and
it was very much
cool
like
it
was challenging to adapt the character, but it was mostly because I had to adapt your character more so, and that became a very a rewrite every night. You do production work during the day, and then spend all night kind of rewriting and revamping the script and getting into a place where you're happy with it.
Cool. And talking about the location is, I mean, pretty incredible. Did you guys know about this cabin beforehand? Because it seems so integral to the story, that this like remote cabin lake area, and there's so much. I guess, I mean, one thing I really liked about the movie is all these intricate choreography of the camera during the chase sequence across the lake, which is like insane. And did you actually have to row across the lake?
Yes.
She's a good rower.
So much back and
Thankfully.
forth, back and forth. Yeah.
But you know, like, so there's so much, like, the location becomes the third character in.
We didn't
this
know about
film.
it. No, we
Okay.
found it on like buried at the bottom of a location database. It had I think it'd been used one time 10 years ago. The Ontario Media Development Corporation has like a location library, and we stole the password from a music video producer and to their account, and basically just scoured it. And one of the guys found it, and I hadn't moved out there yet when he saw it, and initially I'd written the film to be much more tighter, claustrophobic space. So I wasn't sure when I saw photos of this place, but then he and the DP actually drove out it's more like an hour and a half or so, out and brought a drone and a red camera and basically cut together like a vibe piece of how awesome this house was. And as soon as they did that, I was like, okay, guys, I know I clearly, obviously have to shoot the movie here. But in answer to like your question in terms of the blowing camera and revealing the space, the house really dictated that to me. It was kind of a weird experience being like, okay, now I'm seeing the house in person and this is where we're going to shoot this movie. And as I walked in, you know, just exploring the space for the very first time and kind of ducking and weaving through the corners, I realized really quickly that, you know, I would now tailor the script specifically for this and reveal the space with very elaborate wonders, which would become a theme throughout the film.
What was the process like for choreographing this for you as the actress, but also, you know, you did the composition and music for this. So like, how is that process for you creatively? Did it mesh, and you produced the movie? So like, how is that, like, because the choreography, especially within the house and these tight, narrow hallways and the bathroom sequence is pretty intense. Like, how is that for you? And like, were you thinking about the score at the time, or is that at that point in the shoot, did you not realize you were doing the score?
We didn't decide officially that I would be doing the score until he had finished the first cut of the film, and or maybe like the second cut or something. And we had talked about it while we were shooting. We kind of just kept saying it until it became real. But while I was shooting, it was still this far off idea that I might try scoring it.
That was probably the last thing on your mind.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and then in terms of, I mean, what do you want me to talk about? The process of of scoring itself?
Yeah,
or
sure. Yeah,
or
let's do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it was.
How did it come about?
Yeah, it was a process of discovery for me, because it was the first thing I've ever scored. In the last like 2.5 years, I have started writing a lot of my own music and teaching myself music production. And Colin really was witnessing that growth and was an integral part of that kind of process beginning in the first place. So I was familiar enough with the equipment and, you know, realizing that I had a knack for it. But yeah, scoring was not something that I had ever set my mind to in the past, nor did I ever think I would do it. But I began by testing out a couple of scenes. There's the scene at the end where Jules is driving away, and it's really emotional, and you know she's crying and stuff. And that was the first scene that I scored, and that was a really fun night. It came to me relatively quickly. I think I just like came up with everything I did. I started on the piano, and at the time we were staying at a friend's place who had a really nice piano, so I was so lucky to be able to like begin all the themes there. And yeah, I remember finding the chord progression, and that was so great. And then putting it into Logic, which is the program that I worked within on my computer, and pulling in all the like heavy distorted stuff underneath to kind of just like give it a darker vibe. And yeah, that was exciting. And I don't remember the next scene that we did, but after the 2 scenes, we kind of were like, okay, cool, I can do this. And then it was just learning and growing like tremendously throughout it all.
And the song Bloodlet, which has been stuck in my head since I saw it in South by, was that discovered when you were talking to her originally for the role?
So there was another actress, Kathleen Monroe, who was kind of the first person that came to my mind when I was like, I'm going to switch it to a female. She could do it. And when I was discussing it with her, I didn't have access to her demo reel, I don't think. So I couldn't watch like footage and like kind of vibe on her, but she's a musician as well. And there's one clip of her playing that song, which is an original of hers acoustically online, and I would just like watch it again and again and be like, that vibe is so good, but it's not only her, it's that bloody song. I need to use that song. And at the time there wasn't a scene where she like played acoustically. I don't really remember how that's...
There's a bit of a filler scene.
Yeah, I don't remember. I
think
think that was kind of weak and it needed something.
Yeah.
And also the fact that she's like, you know, a savant pianist later as well, just tied in that she could play guitar as well. But yeah, that's just how it came about. Kathleen ultimately, her schedule didn't allow her to do it, but she gave us the song, so.
And then you recently covered it, right?
Yeah, it's such a great song, and I did a cover. If you check out the trailer, if you already have, it plays at the end of the trailer, kind of like this pop electronic vibe, and yeah, it's super different, but it's just got such a great melody at its core that it was fun to play with.
But it will still get stuck in your head.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
All right, I want to kick it out to the audience, so I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, and then I'm going to repeat the question so everyone else can hear. Yes, sure. So the first question is, what was the decision-making process between having the last fight scene take place largely off-camera and silently, right? Yeah. And then the second question was, what was the inspiration for the story? Which are good questions, so you get a locket.
The kernel of the idea came from, well, I grew up loving like mid-90s action thrillers and chase movies, and I wanted to do something that was more of a thriller than less a pure horror film. My previous films, one is a ghost film, one is an alien abduction film, and the next one is a zombie film. So I wanted the villain to be a real person this time. But I stumbled across a bunch of articles actually about men who had killed their wives multiple times and gotten away with it. And I thought that that was really interesting and kind of what type of person would do that, and started to explore how to write that with a very minimal cast, try to write a two-hander, and that's really where it came from. The second question
there was a period of time, though, where I think where this idea was incubating, where I would come home and you would be watching true crime stories all the time, which was just so unsettling and terrifying. But yeah, you were really into that, and I feel like you maybe...
We also toyed with like a couple that wanted to kill each other, and like maybe they were poisoning each other, maybe they were living together and it was taking place over time, but then eventually I came up with the cliff push, which kind of sealed the deal in terms of where the rest of the story went. Second question, or the first question, the fight. Yeah. It was actually a shot that me and another director had talked about doing for a different film that we were just kind of like goofing around with, trying to come up with an idea for, and we were like, oh, and then the guy will like go upstairs, and you won't go upstairs, you'll just stay downstairs listening to the footsteps creak above. But so that stayed in my mind, and that was a while ago. And then when we rewrote the script, and we're shooting on a tight schedule. It's a 20-day shoot. So like to actually shoot a really tightly knit choreographed fight sequence between these two would have been so challenging. We would have needed 2 or 3 days to do it, probably stunt doubles, maybe. So
we did all our own stunts.
My mind just went back to that old conversation where I was like, wow, what if, and also because like the idea of the oneers had kind of been established a lot, and it just kind of presented itself organically. I'm not really too sure. Yeah.
Great. You get a locket. All right, in the middle here. Yes, the question was, what gave you the idea for the visual as the drive is taking place, and the foliage is sort of reflecting in the shot, which is actually a great shot. So yeah, I'm curious about this too.
It happened on the day. It was like my technique is to kind of like let a lot of things dictate my decisions for me the night before, or like in the moment, try to find something new, because I can think about a scene and oftentimes way before production I'll land on the one that's like the most comfortable version for me to execute, the one that my brain goes to right away, but that's not necessarily like the best one. So I had actually thought about shooting that scene very differently, and I realized the night before that I'd shot the same exact scene in It Stains the Sands Red with you driving away crying, and that was basically how my mind was picturing shooting it. And I was kind of like sitting in bed the night before being like, how the fuck am I gonna shoot this differently? And then, yeah, I think I came up with the idea before being on set, but just the idea of darkness kind of covering her in those reflections.
This was a
and
day.
seeing a bit of her was an awesome thing. Yeah, you tell them about that day. That
Well,
was a messed up
this
day.
was, so we finished officially shooting on a Friday, and then we had one extra pickup day on the Saturday. And at this point, we are all just dead tired. But there's kind of a skeleton crew of the main people who have stuck around for this last day. I think I was doing my own makeup that day, and yeah, which was fun. And we just had the bare minimum amount of people there. And then midway through the day, there started being, we got warnings of tornado coming towards where we were shooting. Like, there was going to be such a bad storm that there were going to be a few tornadoes that were going to drop down. And it did end up, it's interesting because that scene, so what I'm trying to say is that like the day was even more rushed and even more kind of like, oh God. And then I think Hannah was driving at one point and like almost tipped the Jeep into a ditch. So, but it was, it was still, we were still having a good time. But just an example of like Colin's will to finish what he sets out to make was at the end of that day, the storm, like it was pouring rain in one of those shots when I finally pull over and I'm like deciding, am I going to go back? It was pouring rain and everyone around Colin was like, it's not going to match. Like, it's not going to work with what's happened. He's like, no, it's going to do it. We're going to do it. And like literally people are drenched. And then like a cop told us that we should leave because we were in danger.
We got the shots.
But we got the
That's all
shots.
that
And yeah, and I think that
I didn't want to leave Ontario without having the damn movie.
No. And that was a beautiful discovery that you allowed to kind of come to you again that day, that came partly from necessity and partly from you trying to find something different.
Yes, right here. So the question was the girl in the end the younger version?
Yeah.
To me, it just harkens back to that same story, and the moment when she realized that she was a psychopath, which was when she saw that bear die. So I wanted that moment to kind of blend both time frames together there.
It's like, I take it that the same callousness that she showed towards that bear, her former self is now showing towards her as she dies. That's my
a cool way to take it.
Yeah.
Why doesn't the protagonist use the weapon? Why do they leave the weapon on the ground?
That's a harder one than why don't they use their cell phones? You know?
Yeah.
You have to constantly establish that it's just not possible.
Yeah.
I think the idea was that Jules is just so broken and heartbroken and traumatized by what's happened and isn't able to, take the action needed. Until later, yeah, because she's just kind of grappling with, I don't know if you suddenly turned out to be a psychopath, if I could like instantly accept that reality and then kill you. Like, it would take some time.
All right, and yes, the red shirt. So the question was, what led the decision to leaving the ending open-ended with the breath at the end versus leaving it sure that she's dead?
Good question. So the script, I think, I don't know. I can't honestly remember, but it's such a funny thing because like it's the last like frame of the film, and I'm sitting in the sound mix on the final day of the sound mix, and I'm like, do I kill her or does she live? And it's like what impulse am I feeling in that moment, you know? So it was something that I'd always kind of been like, it could go either way, but I don't know, I just felt like ending this movie with a little trinket of hope as opposed to being the bleak asshole that I usually am.
All right, and then yes, here. What was the what was the most physically daunting, craziest thing that they've done in any of their collaborations together?
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't figured that out
Got
yet.
some ideas.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's been so many very challenging aspects, particularly physically, about the films that we've done together. But I mean, I've said it before that I come off of these sets feeling stronger than I've ever felt, because I don't, the workout gene is not really in me. And so, you know, it's not something I remind myself of on a daily basis, that I can be strong. And so I will begin many of these days like rowing, and you know, I haven't worked my arms out in so long, and then I'm doing it for 5 hours and it's so painful and I hate you so much in the moment. But by the end of it, I feel stronger, and I'm like emboldened by the fact that I accomplished that. Yeah, so on this shoot, rowing was probably the day where I was just so angry at everyone else, because they were all on the shore, you know, telling me to do it again and again, and there's this drone flying past me, and the communication was not ideal, so I was rowing when I didn't need to be, and I had blisters and everything. But I do now know what I'm getting into with these films. It Stains the Sands Red was maybe a little bit shocking, and I was more of a baby about certain things. But now I get a real kick out of it, and actually, like, I'll step onto other sets where they've got a stunt double for me, and I'll just be like, I don't, you know, if it's something really extreme, they might step in, but otherwise I like to do my own stunts. You know, I'm not gonna do like Tom Cruise stunts, but like
I'm not allowed to technically call them stunts.
Yeah,
They're
sorry.
called actor action.
yeah, actor action. Sorry, but I find it exhilarating, so it's good.
We'll do, yes, here. Yeah, so the question is about the cliff scene. How did you stop so close to the edge of the cliff, and what was that like?
It's actually kind of a lousy slope, and we just made it look like a really good cliff. And so in the wide shot, it's a VFX shot where we've basically done a comp to make the cliff edge.
And interestingly, Brandon stepped in. Brandon, the director of Z and Stillborn,
Yeah.
helped out on a couple of visual effects
yeah,
shots.
he
and
did that
was
one, I
of
think.
them.
And then I you know, just creative framing for her feet reaching the edge, you know. But
Yeah.
it's still kind of sketchy. The push itself was challenging. We did it practically.
Mhm.
Britt's getting pushed off of a ledge onto a bunch of mats,
Yeah,
and
it
they're
was just like a
kind of out of
1
frame.
foot drop kind of thing.
But you know that you could slide.
Yeah, but beyond that, there's a cliff, an actual proper cliff.
So it's a little sketchy, but it's not as bad as it looked. Yeah.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then all the way in the back, yes. All right, so the first part is what's the most emotionally difficult sequence in this film for both directing and acting, and then what are your favorite horror movies?
Yeah, the dinner scene, I don't know that was the hardest scene for me.
Struggling
It-
with Martha.
I was, maybe going through some of my own personal stuff that day that made it a little bit challenging. And it was challenging in that it's obviously a lot of pressure, like, oh, whoa, this is the big monologue, I have to do this well, and there's 4 people staring at me, or 3 people in the, it was, and yeah, I do actually, I was going to say maybe some of the more like heavier emotional stuff was challenging, but in fact, that stuff can sometimes be a little easier because you just throw yourself into it and you're not having to be as necessarily specific. It's just about, committing deeply and letting whatever comes come. But on that dinner table scene, I feel like there was a lot more to balance. And yeah, I was, I guess, being triggered by certain things that were happening on the day, but I am generally the kind of actor that like I use what's going on around me, and I was able to infuse some of the feelings that were coming up that were kind of unrelated to the actual scene, to help kind of ground it and keep it truthful. And I think I did that in like, I mean, not to like toot my own horn, but
First
did that in
take?
like one take. So yeah, it was good ultimately.
I don't know emotionally. Yeah. The whole experience, you know, honestly, like, it's just a marathon. Like, shooting the movie is like, because I just wrapped a movie, and Brandon said something to me. He was like, you know, like, the crazy thing is like, it's such a like physical and mental exhausting thing to go 20 days or however long it is, and socially, you know, to be making that many decisions and to be up against the clock every day is defeating. It's constantly defeating. You're constantly compromising. You're constantly just trying to get it, you know? So that in itself is just an emotional roller coaster. But then, you know, because like I handle so much more than just directing, like I edited the movie as well, and I color graded the movie. And like I'm in the sound mix for like weeks with the mixer, like going mental. So by the time the movie is done, I'm so fucking done with the movie. I don't want to talk about the movie, you know.
So the next Q&A we'll just talk about something else.
Yeah, exactly.
You're past that.
No,
kind
I'm
of,
past
like,
that now,
stage,
but like initially, you know, they're just like, let me out of this world. So I don't know. Yeah, it's emotional, the process.
And then the favorite scary movie.
Sure. I don't know. That's a good one. I like ginger snaps a lot.
It's a good one. I like that.
You're on your own.
I'm so bad. I always like my mind always goes blank when I get asked this question. I will say that recently I did really enjoy Hereditary, the bulk of it. I loved particularly the family drama element of it. I like. That's the first thing that came to my mind. I do like that.
Just teasing, I like
Yeah, and Toni Collette was just badass as hell in that. She was
I
amazing.
like Glengarry Glen Ross, which is a terribly horrifying film about toxic masculinity. I think that's it. Diane's looking at me like I have to wrap. So we will.
You guys are welcome to.
Yeah, we'll be
ask
out
us
in the
questions
hall
whenever.
later.
But thank you. I did promise two of you things. If you really feel like your question deserves a locket, come up and get one.
Get that
I have
locket.
3
Come
more
on.
lockets.